Hi, welcome to the Rounding Significant Figures video. In this video, I'm going to show you how to round your values to a certain number of significant figures or significant digits. This skill is necessary when, after performing a calculation and you are trying to report your answer to in the least number of significant figures, you'll be using this rounding skill to sort of help you with that. So if we look at our first number here, we have 3,094. I want to round this to two significant figures. So unlike when you're counting, if you use the USA map rule, when you're counting, you count from the left side or the Pacific side when there's a decimal place present, and from the right or the Atlantic side when the decimal place is absent. When you're rounding, you always start on the left side, okay? Because again, that USA map trick or whatever is just a trick. It's not really how we count things. We count always from left to right. So we're always going to start on the left side. Now we want to do it to 2 sig figs. So I'm going to start on the left and I'm going to count over two digits. So 1, 2. So that means my cutoff line is going to be between 0 and 9. Okay. Now, when I do this rounding, what I want to do is the numbers to the right of the cutoff are going to be zeros because they're going to be insignificant. So they're all going to be zeros. But you always want to look the number right directly to the right of the cutoff, which is the 9 in this case. If it's a 9, you're going to have to round this up to a 1, right? So look to the right. So that means I got to round it up. If it's 5 or more, you round up. So when I report my value here, I'm going to report it as 3100 or 31,000. Okay. Sorry, 3100. Let's go to the next problem. So in this problem, we're rounding it to 4 sig figs. So once again, you always count from the left to the right. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And in this case, my cutoff is between 1 and 4. Even if there's a 9 here to the right of the 4, it doesn't matter. The number directly right of my cutoff 9 is a 4. So that means I'm going to keep this at a 1. And the number I get here is 10.71. All right, now let's get into some cases where we have these, where we have decimals. So in this case, we want to round it to 5 significant figures. When you're wanting to round something like this that has zeros, the first numbers you see are zeros. That'll be the case when you have a number that's less than 1. We don't count these zeros when we're rounding it to a certain number of significant figures. So you're going to skip these. You don't start counting until you get to your first non-zero digit. And in this case, it'll be the 8. So I skip all that and then I start counting at 8. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That means my cutoff is going to be between the 0 and the 1. So let's make a little note here. I'm going to say skip leading zeros. Because remember, those zeros are just so that people know that it's less than 1. All right, so my cutoff here, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's between the 0 and 1. And so now when I write my answer, I write a 0.00. So all these zeros come down because, again, they're placeholders. 80230. And I do include that last digit there. That 0 is a significant 0. So I can write my value like that. Now in science, because scientists like to be efficient, oftentimes when you have a number that's really small or really large, we use scientific notation. So you could also report this in scientific notation. And if you were reporting this in scientific notation, you would do 8.0230. So all of the numbers come down. And in scientific notation, remember, you're always starting on the ones place. Your coefficient is always in the ones place. So 8 point, and then everything after 8 will be to the right of the decimal. And then it's going to be times 10 to the. Now here's where you need to figure out what's the exponent. Since your number is less than 1, you know it's going to be negative. And in this case, it's going to be negative 1, 2, 3, 4. So negative 4. Now there are two ways to count to figure out what the value of the exponent is. I usually count just 1 0 to the left of the decimal place, 1, 2, 3, 4, and count all the zeros. Some people, what they do is they count from the 0 to the right of the decimal place until they get to the first non-zero digit. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Either way, that's the value. So both of these would work in scientific notation or in regular form here. Okay, next one, we want to round this to 3 sig figs. So again, start from the left, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now, notice how, once again, to the right of the decimal, right of my cutoff, I have an 8, so that means I'm going to have to round this up, right? So I always check there, and that means I got to round this up. And so when I round this up, this becomes a 10, and I carry over that 1, and then this becomes a 100, okay? So now the question is, if you look at this value, can I report this as 3 sig figs? Well, of course not, because remember, these zeros are not significant. I have to make them significant by putting a decimal. So in order for this to be 3 sig figs, I need to add a decimal here, just so people know that all of these zeros are significant. The other way, of course, once again, you can write it using scientific notation. You could also write it as 1.00. And in this case, since the number is greater than 10, it's going to be 10 with a positive number. I should say greater than 1 is going to be 10 with a positive number. And in this case, it's 1, 2, because 10 to the 2 or 10 to the second power is 100. All right, final example. What if we wanted to round the same number from before to 2 sig figs? What will we do then? So in this case, if you're rounding it to 2 sig figs, you're going to, again, count from the left. So 1, 2. Here's my cutoff. Once again, I look to the right. I got to round this up, and I end up with 100. Now, can I put a decimal here to make this 2 sig figs? Of course not. That doesn't work because this value is actually 3 sig figs, and we want 2. So what do you do if you can't put a decimal just to make it to the correct number of sig figs? This is a case where you must use scientific notation. So in your case like this, where you can't just add a decimal in order to get it to be the right number of sig figs, you have to use scientific notation here. And if we want it to be to 2 sig figs, we do 1.0. So those are my 2 significant figures. And then times 10 to the 2. Okay, so I hope you found this video helpful. For rounding, again, this is a skill that you use when you are reporting your final answer in a multiplication or division problem to the correct number of sig figs. Have a quality day.